Welcome to the Spooky Isles. My name's David, and today that we're talking to illustrator and designer Graham Humphreys. How are you, Graham?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Graham is quite well known around the horror circuit here in the UK, and any horror fan would may not know his name, but they'd certainly know his work. He's pretty much the go-to person when it comes to all sorts of horror slasher type uh, film, video covers, record covers, posters, all sorts of things. And we've known Graham for a few years now, and we've always wanted to talk to him on the Spooky Isles. And we're using the lockdown as a great opportunity to lock him down and have a chat.
Can't go anywhere. You're
How,
trapped.
how are you going in the lockdown, Graham?
I'm good actually. It's I work from home very occasionally anyway, so it's been quite an easy thing. In fact, I used to work from home when I originally started my freelance career, and it's something I'm quite used to, and I don't miss company particularly. It allows me to focus on what I'm doing, and then I can go in the evening and enjoy myself.
Well, you are quite a social bloke, though. I wouldn't say you're a person that you might like to do your work, but you do like to get out there and go to the cinema and theatre and things like that.
I do, yeah. I live music, I'm just going out and meeting friends. Really, I'm
Yeah,
a very social creature.
I mean that's something that people could say about you. I mean, you bring a rock and roll lifestyle to the horror posters that you do. You're a bit of a Johnny Rotten when it comes
Well,
to
it's my duty.
it is your duty. Now, we caught up with Graham not long ago. He's just recently released a book of his career. I don't know if people have seen it. I'll try to show it to you on the screen there, called Hung, Drawn and Executed, The Horror Art of Graham Humphreys. Now, this is a beautiful book. And we'll be talking about some of, there you go, we've got that there. We'll be talking about some of the work, oops, Daisy, my special autographed 41 out of 100. So I was there at Forbidden Planet a few months ago to get my special signed edition.
You're in a queue with two members of the Damned, a Cenobite, and a Hammer Lady.
Well, yes, I believe that Hammer Lady. Interesting story. I brought some chocolates back from Australia, and a good friend of ours, Peter Fuller. Many people might know Peter if they know Victoria Price and Vincent Price. He gave her one of my chocolates, one of my violet crumbles, I believe. So there you go. That's my claim to fame. So and also Kim Newman was in the.
He was in the house history.
There was lots of people there. So you've obviously been around long enough to be able to put a book out of your art. How did you actually get involved in producing horror posters or horror film posters and the similar macabre art?
Probably because it's one of the areas I aimed to work in when I left art college. I loved film and I loved music. So the two target areas for me were record companies and film distributors. I didn't have much luck to start with. The music press didn't really want to know. A few record companies expressed interest. I did the odd job here and then. But the film distributors just looked at the work and said, no, we can't use this at all, though we like a professional look to our posters. And so I was a bit crestfallen for a while. But times change, and I think that I was lucky to start my freelance career at a point where a change was in the air, shall we say, and particularly by 1982, a lot of independent distribution companies like Palace Pictures were being set up, and they were there to provide an alternative in many ways. And Palace Pictures in particular were set up through the management of the Scala Cinema, who were a sort of art house cinema based in Goode Street, which is where Channel 4 ended up moving to. And then they moved their premises to the King's Cross Cinema, which became the Scala Cinema proper. And Palace Pictures were based in the cinema upstairs in the attic area, if you like. And so I was lucky that when I was looking around for work, somebody pointed me in a direction, and it just so happened that the second theatrical distribution film was The Evil Dead, and they just picked up in Cannes, and they knew it'd have a sort of cult audience, and were kind of wondering what to do with it campaign-wise. There was an American campaign which they felt was a little bit tame for British audience, and particularly what was interesting about Palace was that the Scala Cinema in its original form was a kind of basement cinema with a kind of a bar and a jukebox, and a jukebox was basically packed full of punk rock and sort of rock and roll, classic rock and roll. And I think, you know, the sensibility was that was their target audience, really. The people who went to the Scala Cinema, the sort of the rebels, the punks, the drunks, and just the sort of the sort of fringes of society, I guess. They kind of knew that the film would resonate with those people, and so I don't think there was any urgent need to make it a commercial poster by any stretch. So what I provided was something which was sort of a bit rough around the edges, and really not attendant to the norms of a film poster, if you like, and it doesn't really flatter any star in a film, doesn't really make any great claims about the film. It just splashes up The Evil Dead and some very bright colours and a lot of texture, a lot of rawness, which was really me trying to bring that kind of punk rock and roll sensibility to it. And also there's, you know, this kind of it's sort of soaked in B-movie culture as well. And at the time I started going to the Batcave club in the centre of London, which kind of catered to people who like Season of Banshees and the Cramps, and it was a sort of the burgeoning gothic scene, I guess, all began at the Batcave. And they would show screens of Universal horror movies, you know, in the dance area, and there were cobwebs everywhere. And it was great. And really, in a way, that was the audience for The Evil Dead, and they embraced it. And I think through that kind of scene, it kind of spread and gained its own cult following, which then went of course mainstream.
Yeah, you say that, like, you know, your influences obviously were sort of punk rock, that kind of edgy type of, you know, independent art that you would have seen back then. What artists were you sort of, you know, most influenced by? What would you consider your biggest influences from an art scene?
Well, probably I was influenced by the posters I saw when I was growing up. You know, I love visual images, and I loved quite I guess splashy images which just kind of threw it in your face. You know, other posters didn't hold back at all. I mean, who needs subtlety? You just throw it all at the poster, and that's, you know, what's fantastic. And a poster then exists in its own right as almost like a two-dimensional a version of the movie, which you just paste onto your wall, put in a frame or whatever. And actually, you know, why bother going to the cinema? It's all there in the poster. So I loved posters for films like The Towering Inferno, The Silent Adventure, Earthquake. You just had all the stuff in the poster. You know, you didn't need anything else. And yeah, I loved that kind of really shouty kind of approach. But I looked at some of the artists. I didn't really know the artists at the time. It was a bit later, probably when I first started at art college. I was more aware of the very commercial posters for things like Star Wars, the much later the Indiana Jones films, and, you know, the illustrated posters were fascinating for me, because I think even before Photoshop there was a slight move to something a lot slicker, and something trying to move away from the sort of 70s 60s kind of approach to film poster making. And so I was becoming aware of people like Drew Struzan, for instance, who I think is a bit of a touchstone for many illustrators. You can look at many contemporary illustrators right now, and you can see that they are influenced by his work in particular. Tom Chantrell was an artist who worked in Britain at the time. He did a lot of posters for Hammer films. He did a lot of stuff, across the whole board. And he did the original UK poster for Star Wars as well, of course, which is one of his most sought after posters. And it's great that somebody who works on the Hammer films, even some of their trashier output, suddenly had probably the most famous film ever. He created a poster for him. Probably at the time he did that poster, again, it would have been probably kind of a bit of a B movie in a way. I don't think anybody anticipated how Star Wars was going to become this massive thing. And you can almost tell in his approach to the poster that there is a kind of a B movie, kind of 50s kind of sci-fi vibe to it. And yet there it is, a film poster classic for a film classic.
Yeah, I think one of the first of your artwork that I saw, and I didn't know you at the time, and I didn't even know who did it, was Freddy's Revenge, and this was back in Australia. This was back when I was living in Australia when I was growing up, and I loved Nightmare on Elm Street. I thought it was just fabulous, and I watched them all. And it was, being a horror kid, that was the films you watched. But how did that come about? How did you come about to do Freddy's Revenge or Nightmare on Elm Street?
Again, this is through Palace Pictures. So really, having worked on The Evil Dead and then working on other projects for them, which kind of all the work I was doing was very much in the Evil Dead vein then, because I think people kind of just saw that film being successful, and people like to repeat a formula, I guess. And when Nightmare on Elm Street came along, they felt stylistically wasn't really me at all, though. They wanted something far more restrained and commercial. They wanted something which had some subtlety, which I wasn't really offering at all at the time. As it happened, the poster didn't come to me, Nightmare on Elm Street. It went to some friends who had set up a small studio, and in fact, I'd introduced them to Palace Pictures, and they'd started working on poster work for them, and very different to the sort of stuff I do. However, it was discussed that perhaps I could work on the poster, but with the understanding that the approach would be very different to everything else I've been working on at the time. And luckily they did trust me to do that. So I produced some sketches, and they liked what I did, and I did the poster. So I was very lucky that there was that trust from the client. And so, of course, that led on to the sequel. And I think we didn't illustrate Nightmare 3, but we did illustrations for 4 and 5 as well. But yeah, Freddy's Revenge, it's still one of my favourite pieces, in as much that I can like anything I ever do. And one of those artists that always hates everything they do, and you always look at the failings and how it should have been so much better. But sometimes I look back at it and I think actually it's not that bad piece of work, especially as an early piece as well. And I remember producing it. I remember going to see a screening of the film and thinking, this is terrible. What can I, this is such a bad film compared to the first film. And that opening sequence was so strong, I went downhill from then on. But so I thought, well, so I'll just go with the opening sequence. That's the best bit in the whole film. And essentially that's what I created. And of course, there's a scene, I think rather than the gloves, the blades are extruded from his fingers. So I wanted to show that as well. So I remember we had, I was working with some friends and in a studio. And so we got one of the guys who's like an office junior, and I just sellotaped some pencils to his fingers and said, do that. And he did. And that was my reference for Freddy. So it's kind of jazz hands Freddy.
What is your process for creating a movie poster or a film poster? Do you have to see the film beforehand?
Normally you'd expect to. I would prefer to always, and generally now I do. It wasn't always the case. There are occasions when I'd be sent a set of stills, maybe transparencies as it used to be back in the day, black and white stills sometimes, just the basic set of press photos to work from. Mostly I'll be sent, as it was at the time, VHS copies of films. I remember working on what became Creepers, the UK version of Phenomena, the Argento film. Of course, Creepers was the very heavily cut version that the UK saw the cinema on its very limited release. And I've been given the full version VHS form to watch to get some ideas, not realizing, of course, that this was going to be cut to ribbons. And so I thought, well, one of the greatest scenes at the very end with the monkey welding the razor. And I had no idea that scene was essentially going to be cut from the final version. So I concentrated on that for the poster as the main image, and of course it kind of disappeared in the theatrical release.
So what other films do you remember from early part of your career that have led to now? We were talking to you one time. You were mentioning something about Joan Crawford having a influential career.
Well,
Tell us about that.
Things I've given some talks at different events and such like, and you kind of find yourself going back to your memory, and you kind of realize that you did certain things for certain reasons and because you're inspired by something at the time. And it really kind of goes back to the Evil Dead, I think, because when I was looking for work, not having much to do, I would just create samples. You don't sort of sit around doing nothing. You actually paint, keep on doing stuff, doing the kind of illustration work that you want to receive commissions for. And I remember seeing some pictures of Joan Crawford in some terrible horror films which did in the latter part of her career, things like Trog, Berserk, and mistakenly assumed that she had a career in horror films. I didn't know much about her at the time, and this is pre-internet. I couldn't do the research. Anyway, so I thought, well, this is an interesting character, and with these kind of ludicrous eyebrows and this kind of weird look. And I'd heard that she'd had her back teeth removed to create this kind of incredible sort of cheek kind of sculpted look. And I was quite fascinated by this very severe, scary kind of woman. And so I used her as the basis of a couple of illustrations. One was kind of based on the B-52 song Planet Claire. I had sort of Joan Crawford in a sort of pink spacesuit with a big bubble helmet and some planet in the background, a rocket going around it. And the other one was Joan as a vampire with sort of bats tangled in her hair, sort of in front of a stained glass window. And actually, that piece was in the folio when I went to see Palace Pictures, and that piece is what identified me as being the person who could do the Evil Dead. They liked the look of it, the texture of it, and the way kind of the sort of feel of it. So that really is how I got the Evil Dead commission through Joan Crawford.
So had you actually known who she was?
Of course, since I have, well, I did go and see Mommy Dearest, so probably that wasn't even the best way to kind of learn about her career. But that was where I really realised that actually she had a Hollywood career, and was considered a beauty in her time. And the horror stuff was a much later part of her career.
Tell us about some of your favourite horror posters you've done over the times.
Well, it's always hard to look back and identify pieces you like. One of those artists that always feels disappointed in their output, and you always look at the bits that have failed in your work, and so you don't tend to kind of make that kind of judgment that you favour particular pieces. They're just part of a process which is ongoing, where you're trying to achieve something better each time. But there are pieces every now and again you look and think, well, that's not too bad, really. And some of the stuff I've enjoyed doing have been private commissions, in particular of late, where you get a great classic film, and you're allowed to run riot with your own interpretation of how a poster would be for that film. And it's dangerous territory in some ways when you get given a classic to work with, because you know that with so many fans you're going to disappoint a large number of them, whatever you do. People get so fixated on particular things in a film, and you run the risk of either offending people's interpretation of the way they see the film, or perhaps sort of maybe highlighting certain aspects which they felt would be not so important. But you think, sod that, and you just get on with it, though. So you just do what you feel is what you feel is right for the project. And so one of those pieces I did was for a private commission for Halloween. Great classic film, one of the early slasher films, and so iconic in so many ways. A fantastic soundtrack. There's always been one scene I felt was missing in the film. We were aware that Michael Myers has desecrated the grave of his sister, and has removed the tombstone, which then gets placed on the victim's bed. And I thought, God, why don't we see that bit where he just rips open, the tomb? And that's such a strong idea, and it's so transgressive as well. Though it's like you're taking out your sister's tombstone. How dare you? So anyway, I thought, well, that has to be the central image, though. Michael Myers with the tombstone. So I ended up posing myself with a piece of wood. To set up the timer on the camera, and run away, stand there, go, and then run back and turn the camera off. So yeah, but I was quite pleased with the way that worked out. Though. The Thing was another piece I worked on for the same clients. Again, you're playing with such an iconic film, and you don't want to play around with people's precious kind of memories of the film, and the things they kind of fixate on. But again, you think sod it and get on with the job. And so for me, looking at Kurt Russell, and he's looks like Jesus a little bit, though, and he's kind of this ultra good guy who really is there to sort of save the world as it exists within the film. And you rarely see the flying saucer. You see the flying saucer at the beginning of the film, but people forget it's even in the film, other than the buried craft. And I just love that opening sequence. It's a classic flying saucer. Like, why not use that? So the flying saucer becomes sort of a halo around sort of the Jesus head. So it becomes like a Russian icon almost. So, and I like playing around with these subtle little ideas. If they're not there to be seen necessarily, but for me, I know it's there, and that's the way I built the picture. I mean, even the Evil Dead poster was essentially a stained glass window. And I've always argued, and I love saying this. I do presentations that I think the stained glass windows are the original horror film posters. People used to go to church; that was their cinema. Advertise, coming up next week, this window here, starring Saint Peter or whoever. So that's where I think the entertainment business really began, and that's the origin of horror film posters.
Okay. I mean, you were talking about maybe not annoying, but people have obviously their feelings about these films, like Halloween and the thing. I just reminded myself of one when I was looking on the back of the book, yes. And you've got The Old Dark House, which is a favourite of mine. I don't mind it. I mean, I think it's good to see what other people think of the films, and I really like the fact that there's new material coming out, like your artwork, that is celebrating some of these older horror films that people wouldn't necessarily know. I mean, Old Dark House was potentially a lost film, and now we've got it. We've got beautiful restored versions and things like that. So I just think the more the better. So
I agree, and it's worked for me. It pays the bills. So Old Dark House was a lovely commission to get. I mean, that was a real joy for me, because guiltily I'd never actually seen the film, and so it made me watch the film, which is a good thing, of course. And of course the film is fantastic. I mean, what a great cast. I mean, who wouldn't want the chance to paint Boris Karloff and Charles Lawton and Ernest Sligo? I mean, just such fantastic faces. And I guess in a way that's one of the issues we have with film posters now, that you're looking at lots of beautiful faces, mostly surgically enhanced as well, though. And, there's kind of beautiful photography, a little bit of photoshopping, but it's just all these beautiful people, just endless beautiful people. We'll sod them. We want good, gnarled, ugly faces. And that's what I love doing.
Yeah. Now, we're talking before about some of the films that you've done. Now, there's obviously, you still do work, and I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the ones you've done in recent times. You
Magic no figures yet.
Yeah. You regularly do Fright Fest. You do other sort of different festivals and things like that. We were talking before the video about Hammer at the Vault. Can you tell us a little bit about that project that you did a few years ago?
That was an interesting one. Well, Hammer at the Vault was a celebration of Hammer films at the point where Hammer were very serious about restoring to the best possible quality the early films like Dracula, Frankenstein, Chris Frankenstein, that was, various others, the ones they still have the rights to, of course. And so as part of that restoration project, they associated with a group called the Flickr Club, whose mandate was screening classic films which had a book origin, and they'd invite somebody in to read from that original book and then screen a film based on the book. So with the Hammer event, it became a sort of week and a half, 2-week event, and they had people like Fenella Felding, who read from Frankenstein before screening of Frankenstein Created Woman, for instance. They had Dexter Fletcher did a reading. Mark Gatiss read from The Hound of the Baskervilles. So all these interesting characters. Madeline Smith read from Frankenstein again before screening of Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. So it was great stuff. Kim Newman was there to present The Lost Continent. He'd been asked to present Dracula, and he said, well, I will, but he said, I'd rather actually present The Lost Continent, which he felt was a wildly entertaining film, which often is overlooked as one of the Hammer classics, because I think it is a Hammer classic. But yes, the whole thing was that the vault part of it, the festivals held in the vaults underneath Waterloo Station. Now the vaults were there because Waterloo Station was essentially built on marshland. In order to hold it up, stop them sinking, they had to sink pillars down and basically create vaults and then build the station on the top. As part of that original station, second station, much smaller station, was built in the back, which was called which served the Necropolis Railway, which was a railway built to convey corpses to Brookwood Cemetery, because the cemeteries were getting full up in London. They just had to get rid of all the corpses somewhere. So they built this huge cemetery, Brookwood Cemetery, and corpses would be conveyed from the Necropolis station at Waterloo. I think there were about 4 or 5 different classes. There's like the first class, second class, and obviously rotting corpse class. They had carriages for different denominations as well. Ones with relatives. I don't think the relatives actually travelled with the corpses, but yeah, it's interesting. As a corpse, you could get a first class ticket. Why? I don't know. But anyway, the actual chamber in which the screenings were held was the actual vault where they stored the corpses. Would pile them up because it was particularly cold, and so they'd wait till there's a packed vault before getting a train to ship them all out. And it was bloody freezing in there, I have to say. But I went to most of the screenings, and it was great fun.
And you obviously enjoyed putting together the promotional material for that.
Oh yeah, that's the whole point, wasn't it? Yeah, I was asked to do a poster, which was a sort of there was a point to it. It wasn't just me rambling. I was asked to do a poster which actually would have a number of portraits, scenes from some of those classic Hammer films. They had a list of the films they were showing. One of them they'd incorrectly identified as being in their ownership, which was Countess Dracula. And so my original poster, which featured Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, all those great people, at the very top centre had Ingrid Pitt as Countess Dracula. And it was only once I'd finished the painting, they said, "Oh, bugger, we can't have Ingrid Pitt. We don't own the film. However, we do have the Twins of Evil." So I had to hastily paste in one of the Twins of Evil, just the one.
So a twin of evil. So okay, well that's so. Just before we go, can you tell us what's that?
So soon.
So soon.
Is that something I said?
We're going twice as long as we normally would. Anyway, so before we have to go. Before we go, can you maybe give us a bit of an insight on what you're working on at the moment, maybe, or what's coming up that we could be looking forward to?
Well, I'm doing some more private commissions right now because they are private commissions, and therefore not subject to confidentiality
Yeah.
terms. So I'm working on an alternative poster for Dawn of the Dead. And the next one after that will be Jaws, which is again one of those iconic films which you kind of almost dare not tread on, but at the same time you think, well, I'm going to, and I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm doing that with Dawn of the Dead as well, though. But other than that, I've got some Blu-ray covers. I'm just working on one right now. It's a classic old 50s B movie, which is going to be released by Fabulous Films, so I can't give you the title on that.
Yep.
I've just completed another job for them. It's actually, what happens very occasionally is that with a large body of work over decades, you might find yourself going back to a job or being asked to go back to a job you've worked on before and doing a new version of the same thing. So I've just done a second version, which of a film which I can't mention yet, which is actually not a horror genre film, strangely. But it will be the second version I've done for this not great film, which does have some great character actors in it. But it's fun to work on. It's very silly. But anyway, that will be announced shortly anyway. Then I've got a project coming up, which is for a documentary, which is called In Search of Tomorrow. A campaign will be announced at the end of this month. And this will be a follow-up film to In Search of Darkness, the 80s horror documentary. So whereas that was all horror, this will be the science fiction films of that same era, with there'll be a bit of horror thrown in because I can't help myself. But so that'll be quite a major project, quite a complex job to work on. So hopefully that's going to be ready by the end of the month.
So you're going to be quite busy over the lockdown then.
Yes.
Okay. Now, talking of the lockdown, if people want to find out more about Graham Humphreys' work, at www.grahamhumphreys.com, and if apparently there's a bit of a deal going for the book at the moment.
Yes, hung, drawn, and executed.
It's executed. I'm calling it hung, drawn, and quartered. It's
yeah. Well, that's the terrible pun.
Okay, sorry.
You hang a picture, you execute the brief.
Yes, I get it now. Sorry, that's my fault.
But yes, the publisher, Carrero Press, are offering a 15% discount on the book if you order through their website with the code LOCKDOWN.
Okay, well, we'll make sure I put that in the description down below. So if people want, and I'll of course put your website in there as well, if people want to see your work and get a copy, I really do recommend it. It's a wonderful book. It's lovely. It's got, it's an amazing, collection of artwork. And I really do. I just think it's nice to finish off with the back of the book. I just notice you've got what people say about you. So this is the best. You've got Mark Gatiss saying that you're scarier than the film. You've got Richard Stanley saying a danger to bourgeois society. Beautiful and transformative, says Clive Barker. I love the poster, says Sam Raimi. And Dacre Stokes is feasting on the blood of the past to nourish the new. So, you've got some big names there.
Well, what's some lovely written contributions from Victoria Price, Sarah Karloff, Jeffrey Coombs, Larry Fessenden, and of course an introduction by Dacre Stoker as well.
So you've got lots of... so we've been really proud to host you tonight, to have you as our guest.
Oh, thank you.
And maybe get you on another time, maybe talk maybe about some of your favourite films would be really good, because obviously you've seen a lot, and you'd be really interested to talk to. So thanks very much, and we'll talk to you later. You take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.